Welcome, everyone. I'm Craig Herndon. Thanks for being here this morning. This is part of our leadership series, and so I see some familiar faces in the audience, folks who may have joined yesterday for a session or two on leadership. Thank you for coming back. You may recall this room is being used throughout the entire conference to host leadership sessions. Today's session I'll introduce momentarily, but I want to point out two things. One will be, I think this is being recorded so that folks can have access to this event after the session. And then two, some of the information that's going to be covered today, I think the topic on leadership series books, the books featured in today's conversation, I believe will be available at the conference through the Follett site here on grounds at the Hotel Roanoke. And so if you're interested in one of the books being covered, you can dig in yourself. I think it's available today. And so it's my pleasure to introduce a distinguished panel we have today. And if you'll pardon me, if you were here yesterday, I can't help myself, but I had to do something very similar for this panel. And that is, I know them, but I thought I'd try to find out more about them by doing a little search online. And so gosh, what I found out is going to stun you. I'll begin with closest to me, Dr. John Dever. I've always known John Dever as a distinguished faculty member, a rich history in English. In fact, John Dever taught at TNCC years ago before becoming president, and he taught on site at the Newport News shipyard, a strong relationship that exists still today. I had no idea that also John Dever is a famous poker player, professional poker player at that. He's also a critically acclaimed actor who had a role in the Lincoln movie that took place in Richmond, Virginia. And he still had time to become the president of Thomas Nelson Community College, its 8th president in 2011. Dr. Godwin, I've always known to be, well, one, she was a community college president in Ashland, Kentucky before she came to Virginia. She's an economic developer, and it stays with her in her heart. She's the rare breed of community college president who has strong business experience as well as a JD. And so she's really quite round in her her vision of community colleges. But I also had no idea that she had an on the side business in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. She serves as an orthodontist, where right now you can get a Invisalign for a reduced price. So see Dr. Godwin after the session. But friends, what I found about Dr. John Rainone, it's gonna worry you.
Only half of that's true.
Well, I'll let the audience judge which half. So the first half is that he's president of Dabney, Lancaster Community College, a role he served in since 2013. Prior to that, he was at York County Community College in Maine. I believe you were a founder at that community college, along with Gary Rhodes, who's in the audience right now. That community college was new, and those two folks helped start that institution. And John, you served in a capacity that included workforce development as well as institutional advancement most recently, and you have some national recognition when it comes to institutional advancement. Or the case is that this is true, according to the internet, you are part of an organized crime family in Chicago where you helped turn against William Potatoes Donovan. No kidding, folks. He turned on William Potatoes and is now on the lam, and Potatoes is mad.
If I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Okay. We're going to go with the first one. Thanks for indulging. I'm excited this panel with us today. They're going to spend some time talking about leading learning organizations, the art of making choices. And this group has engaged in a series of books that are known as the Chancellor's Reading List for Leadership. And so I'm going to pose some questions to them, but I think you're going to find their communication and your questions of them, time permitting, at the end of the session. We have a sharp completion time at 9:15. And so we'll make sure there's a few minutes for your questions. But I'm going to dig right in. And I'm going to ask our distinguished panel, of all the leadership books that you could have recommended, that could have been recommended from the Chancellor's professional reading list, why did you choose the book you selected? And what makes it worthy or memorable or meaningful? And Dr. Dever, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, well, thank you, Craig. This book, The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization by Peter Senge, is a book that I've been wrestling with for a number of years. This is a new edition. They say it's new and updated with 100 new pages, but the version I worked with came from the 1990s when I was serving as an American Council on Education Fellow, and they were giving us a lot of reading to do. And this is the book I kind of seized upon and have actually done some writing about. What I really liked about it in terms of its applicability to what we do in community colleges although it is about the corporate world, in corporate and business leadership primarily, what it recognizes is that leadership, to be truly effective in today's world, whether it's corporate or education, has to be collective. And I found that particular point of view highly congenial to what I consider to be the collegial nature of our institutions. We know that attempts to manage higher education, and there are cautionary tales out there all over the place of people who think they can come in and we're going to do it my way. Just never works. It never works. It always just engenders resistance and moves things back. To bring any true organization along that is primarily staffed by professional people, as of course community colleges are, you have to bring the group along, and you have to rely upon the resources and talents and abilities and aspirations and dreams and commitments of those in the organization. And I felt that that was highly, highly appropriate for community colleges. In fact, I think the corporate world has learned something really from higher education, that to be successful, all have to be involved. So that's the reason that I have found this book to be, at least for me, and I hope for others. We've used it at Thomas Nelson and our Presidential Leadership Institute as a basic text, has been very helpful in that regard.
Thank you, Dr. Dever. I want to come back and ask some questions of you, but I'm going to make sure we have time for other panelists too. Dr. Godwin, same question. Why that book?
Well, part of it is because I misread the email. You know that old thing goes around on Facebook, like, stop, what are you reading right now? Page 5, line 5, whatever. I read this email that, like, what was I reading right now? And I will say books are my true vice. And I was reading this book, Smarter, Faster, Better. One of the reasons I wanted to read this book is because I see this craze about faster, but faster is not always better, and about smarter. And I'd had this conversation with my mother, which is always interesting. I was with a group of folks, and someone asked me how I was doing, whatever, and I just said the word busy. And my mother, in her most genuine Montgomery in Alabama accent, after the person walked off, she goes, "You don't ever need to say you're busy. Gnat flies are busy." Don't say you're busy. So I'm not going to say that anymore. This gentleman wrote The Power of Habit, and I am fascinated by productivity and what makes us productive. And I think there's this craze that we have so much to do and only so many hours to do it. So I was really fascinated by this. And what I found was that Charles Dewing basically broke down to really kind of 8 principles of what he thought was productivity. And I'm only going to share one at this point because it's the principle that controls all the other principles. I thought it was very interesting. Number one, he defined productivity in an interesting way, and I'm going to tell you what he said. He said it's really when we look at the best use of energy, intellect, and time and putting those things together. And so for human beings, when we can get the maximum reward with the least amount of effort. And I'm thinking, this is sounding pretty good actually here. But he talked about control, and that control is what triggers motivation. And motivation triggers productivity. And for me, who's trying to see how many things I can get into one day, that registered with me. But then when I read the book a second time, I really began to translate this for students, because one of the things I know, having spent 35 years as an English professor and president and other things, is that options don't work very well sometimes with our students. So how do we limit options, but give them control so they're motivated, so they will be productive. And it really drew me to the conversations we're having now about pathways. Because when I have students in my office talking about their future and where they want to go, I do find that even in our limiting some of their choices, because they're making the choice to step out into this pathway that's a journey that they can see, that they are very much in control of that journey. They're in control of that pathway, and I believe it is extremely motivational, and I think it will really generate that productivity. And the third thing I'm interested in this, because I am concerned about burnout. I'm concerned about our faculty's burnout. Those institutions that have had budget issues and enrollment declines, we're asking people to do more and more and more and more. So how can we redefine their productivity so it is smarter and better? And they're not, that we can try to have an antidote for this burnout. And I think that creating elements of control where we're really, what I would say, delegating the decision-making part, which kind of relates to the fifth discipline, very much so. Charles makes a comment here that is just priceless when he says, you cannot delegate thinking. You cannot delegate thinking. And you think about that we have to give time and energy and that space for thinking, and it's how we really involve more folks in the decision-making process. And that hopefully would stimulate a sense of control over our decisions, over our destiny, which would then stimulate the motivation to be productive, so we don't feel like we're just doing more and more and more, accomplishing less and less and less. So those three worlds started to merge for me in this book.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin. Crime boss,
Yeah.
Dr. Rainone.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I read this while I was in prison, but I won't tell you what prison I was in. So,
Smart.
Many of us in our doctoral programs probably read Reframing Organizations by Bowman and Deal, right? A good portion. Well, what this book did, and I apologize that I was looking at the books yesterday from Follett. This is the most expensive one on the list. I apologize for that. But what they did was they took their four lenses or four frames and applied them to higher education. And I've always been a fan, and hearing the first session yesterday about real life leadership, it was really key. So I've been a fan of those research-based and practical, leadership books. Good to Great, the Leadership Challenge, because it was all research-based. But this is very practical for higher ed pieces, including the chapter of working with your boss. Okay, so, so really for me, I saw this as an opportunity to really take the, from graduate school, taking the reframing organizations, but now they did a really nice job applying it to the higher ed component. It really helps explain the many dimensions of higher education. And we know that there are numerous dimensions, okay? And there are more dimensions of higher education than's even presented in this book. It really provides a practical and intellectual sort of way a leader can think and work. And I found a lot of pieces, so I read this after my first year at Dabney, and I'm a active reader, so I'm underlining and writing notes in there, and I could see a lot of things in there that had happened even in that first year, okay, as president at Dabney, which was good and bad. It was an opportunity. I wish I had read it the previous year, but it really is much more of that practical approach to leadership, which I like. The people that tend to write leadership books sometimes and have never actually been a leader themselves. But It's research-based, as well as very practical. These are real-life college and university leaders that they talk about, and sort of the learning components in there. And I'll get into some of the points with the future questions, but that was really the pieces for me that stood out.
Thank you. Dr. Devert, you're 6 years into a presidency. Prior to that, you had a number of years as an executive vice president with a wide span of authority at Northern Virginia Community College, roles as dean and faculty member before that. So with your look across those experiences, what do you see in the fifth element that you would share with folks in this room who are perhaps in all the same positions I've just mentioned in various places? What are the things you see looking back, you say, this fifth element brings to light, or I identify with, or the three best lessons are from what you read?
Well, as I stated earlier, I do believe leadership is a collective effort. It belongs in all levels of the organization, and I've seen that and worked through that in my own experience and with my colleagues. So I don't believe leadership is just a matter of position. It's a matter of where you are and helping the organization move towards where it should be. What I do think becomes very clear in this particular book, though, is that's a noble and sentiment. It's something that we find to be compatible. We like the idea of shared governance. But what this book talks about is to actually execute on that is tough. You have to really work at it if you're going to do it. And so the book, the heart of the book is the 5 disciplines that Singy talks about, and how you collectively have to work as a group to start mastering those. And again, it's not easy. So just briefly, personal mastery, which he considers to be the most radical of the concepts, particularly in the corporate world. We're used to it, I think, in the academic world from a faculty perspective, but in the corporate world, investing in individual people and letting them go as far as they can go without necessarily tying it to the benefit of the organization directly. It will ultimately be. That's what personal mastery is about. All of us in the organization have to know our own territory and to excel in our own territory. And we just can't be functionaries in that regard. Moving on, mental models. You've always got to be questioning your assumptions. We've all got to realize that we see the world through the lens that we want to see it. I often tell people, for me, an old English teacher, every problem I see is a communications problem. I see it that way, and that's fine, that's helpful, but a lot of times that means I miss a lot of other things because I focus that way. Mental models is about questioning your assumptions and broadening it. Moving on to shared vision, moving an organization is much more than problem solving. We all tend to, day by day, feel like if we've got whatever our areas of responsibility is, whether it's the classes that we're teaching or the division that we're managing or whatever it is, it turns out to be this one and this one and this one and this one, and I got to take care of this and then I take that, etc. And we can fall into the attitude that it's only that our job is just a fire brigade, and we've got a big bucket, and we're putting out fires day in and day out. If we get to that stage, we've really missed it because we've lost the vision about where we're going and sharing that vision. Team learning is about really interacting with your colleagues in very, very meaningful ways. Moving from just simple discussions to true in-depth dialogues and exchange points of view. And finally, the fifth discipline is systems thinking, realizing the impact of a decision that you make here long-term is not always that linear thing that you thought it was going to be, that you thought if I just do this, it's going to produce this. But there are many, many reverberations in the organization about that, and there are many examples. So what I would just say, in answer to, to sum it up, yes, leadership is collective, but it's hard work, and we've all got to work on it. We all have to deal with that if we're going to be successful at it.
Thank you. Dr. Godwin, Dr. Rainone, so building off of what Dr. Dever said and thinking about sort of the profound elements that you may have grabbed from it, was there something in the work that you read that really struck you and stuck with you, a passage perhaps, or a lesson that you think is valuable to share with this group?
In this book, one of the 8 principles, one of the principles really dealt with goal setting. And I think that's key for all of us, that we're always setting goals, and we're always reassessing our goals, and we model that with our colleagues, and we model that with our students in particular. I don't know, being a classroom professor, I don't know of anything that the greatest gift I could give students is to help them to understand and watch me struggle and watch my goal setting process. I think that can be very positive for students. One of the things that this book really outlines is that if you really want to drive your productivity, where you're working smarter, faster, and better, is that your goal setting be both stretch goals plus SMART goals. Those things we talk about of being strategic and measurable and achievable and realistic and timely. When we talk about SMART goals, it's really like that. We almost need that long-term vision. We need that vision that we can share with others and build a support system for. And the more we share our vision and find colleagues that will help us, the more like we are. But we need both. We don't choose one or the other. And when we get so fixed on those SMART goals, which is what we do in strategic planning, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's what we do sort of, we're very fixed on this block of how many have a to-do list of your to-do list? Okay. How many of you put things on your to-do list you've already done so you'll get a check? Yeah, you are my people. You are my people. I love that. But the idea that you would truly have a stretch goal. And I know, having owned my own businesses where I was trying as a company we'd have our family company that ran smaller companies, it was very important for the flagship mother company to have these big stretch goals. Because you know what? If we met our SMART goals, we would survive. We could make payroll, we could pay our taxes, we could keep the lights on. But unless we had stretch goals, we could not. And we had an ESOP, we had employee stock options. So unless we had those stretch goals, we couldn't get beyond to see just where we could go. I think that's great for students too. I talk a lot about helping students understand having a bridge to a job that basically allows you to have a pathway to a career. And I talk about myself. I was an administrative assistant. I took a 9-week secretarial course at a community college and got a job, and then I learned how to program. I basically taught myself, I'm dating COBOL, Fortran, that stuff. But I could work 10 hours and make as much money as my friends working 30, flipping burgers. I grew up at a grocery store. I'm a licensed florist. I made a lot of money sticking flowers for Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, and I'm very good at funeral stands. I just want to say that. And so they have a big funeral, they'd call me in. But it was my bridge to a job, right, that allowed me to continue to keep going to school and to pay for it. And so I think but that was not my dream. None of those were my dream. None of those were my stretch goal. But they provide, and I think one of the messages that he really just pounds in here, he calls it cognitive closure. If we're not careful, we will frame out our next steps or the next 3 steps, and we will try to come to a resolution of exactly what we're going to do and the decisions we're going to make, and we'll miss that stretch goal part. And then when anything goes wrong in the box, you've seen this happen with students, haven't you? When anything goes wrong in the box, they just, it's just so disheartening. It's hard for them to pick back up that stretch goal. He made a major case for keeping those two, in goal setting, having both of those kinds of goals first and foremost. And I thought that was a really powerful, I learned a lot from just that conversation.
Yeah, I found 2 specific things. I won't be as profound as my colleagues here, but as president, we have to be cheerleaders. And as faculty, you're cheerleaders for your students. And there was one thing that really caught me in here, was that the most basic task of leaders is to foster hope. Because leadership takes courage, solid thinking, creativity, and to your point, persistence. Persistence in the face of the unknown. And it really is important. I mean, think about what our students, our keynote speaker this morning, the unknown just 2 years ago. Okay, and there's still some unknown. And it's really our jobs to be those cheerleaders. And I think that you're a cheerleader if you're a faculty member for your students. You're a cheerleader if you're a dean or a vice president. And for the presidents, we are cheerleaders. We certainly are cheerleaders. But the one piece that I really felt sort of summarized nicely, and I'm going to read it right, is that it says they, leaders, know their job requires the skills of a good analyst and social architect who can craft a high-functioning institution where all the parts contribute to the whole, a political leader who can forge necessary alliances and partnerships in service of our mission, a prophet and an artist who can envision a better college or university and inspire others to heed its call, and a servant both to the institution and to the larger goals of higher education and society. That really summarizes what, in my opinion, what we do, what we all do, and whether you're a faculty member, a dean, a president, that's exactly what we do. And those are the things that really have, but the fostering hope, you know, I mean, we're in the hope game. We change lives. So that's what we need to do.
Can I make a shameless plug for the next session? Because I think Dr. Rhodes is going to talk about Good to Great. And I teach that twice a year for our management boot camp for workforce. And so I just did that yesterday. So it's fresh on my mind. But in looking at the Stockdale paradox that's referred to that Jim Collins talks about, pay a particular attention to that in relationship to this conversation about hope. Because when he was asked how did he survive a POW camp when his other colleagues with the same conditions did not, he made it very clear. And this is what we do every day. And I mean, this is what you all do, and this is what we do. You look at the brutal facts. You look at those budget numbers just one more time. You look at enrollment numbers just one more time. You look at retention and persistence, and you look at all the factors that you're dealing with, the brutal facts. But with this unrelenting faith that you're going to lead through it.
Yeah.
That this unrelenting faith that you're going to make it, and that instilling that to our students and our faculty and staff and whatever. So if you're in the next session, pay close attention. I know Dr. Rhodes will tell you some good stuff.
No pressure, Gary.
No pressure.
Well, speaking of future sessions, I'll circle back to that in a moment. But Dr. Dever, in his initial comments, made reference to the fact that the corporate world can be learning from the world of higher education. I don't know about you, but I've spent my entire career working in public service. And frequently I'll be places and they'll say, well, if we just ran higher education like a business, ... And there are certainly lessons to be drawn, but I wonder, panel, John, you made reference to this. Dr. Godwin, you've made references in your experiences both as a business owner and in public service. Dr. Rainone, you've indicated that this is really drawn towards bridging, this work is drawn between bridging that big picture towards higher education. I wonder if you see anything in the works you've read or in your experiences in leadership that would lead you to some conclusion about what can higher education lend to business. We tend to speak about it a whole lot the other way, and there'll be a whole session later today in this room focused on what higher education can learn from business. But what about the works you've read or your experiences, you might say, this is a lesson that can be drawn from higher education to the business world? John, any comments there?
Well, business often is, maybe this is putting it too extreme, envious of higher education. They keep looking to us as the answer. Again and again and again, the business community, I call it their key anxiety is the workforce anxiety. And by that I mean, they understand when they look at the brutal facts that that they are losing the heart of their organization, which was the baby boomers. They're retiring. A lot of people are going out the door. A lot of history, a lot of talent is going out the door, and they're not sure that there's a replacement is coming in. And they continually in our community, we hear it, statewide, we hear it nationally. They look to you people in education. If you're not going to do it, it's not going to be done. We're not going to be able to function. And so I think we remain oftentimes a kind of mystery to them, what we do. And I know when I can sometimes talk to business leaders, they talk about, do you have tenure? That's a bad thing. Of course, I say, well, we don't have it in Virginia's community colleges. Do your faculty really work, or are they just out, reading all day and writing articles or something like that? Ours really work. Let me tell you what a load is at Thomas Nelson Community College, a faculty load. But there is this sense that we've got the answer that they badly need, but they see us as a mystery about how we actually operate. Probably not exactly in response to your question, but I've just been struck by that difference between our two cultures as I interact with the business community.
Dr. Godwin, you lived in both worlds. What can we be proud of in higher education that is worth exporting when it comes to leadership? What do you see both within Patrick Henry Community College and your travels nationally that leads you to believe we have something to offer the broader world in higher education when it comes to leadership?
Well, I can speak because I had a wide range of businesses. I would say that the trend is, and particularly if you're manufacturing anything, or we were in the technology development business, one of our companies, is that the tendency in that corporate environment is to focus on the process. And if anything if you're not hitting your numbers or your sales quota, or you're not hitting your whole supply chain, is you get really zeroed in on process and the procedure whereas in higher education we understand that it's all about the people. We start with the student. And so I think that's something that business and industry could learn from us. Many times they have the talent sets on the floor, on the factory floor, that the talent set can most effectively and most efficiently address those areas. It's not just tweaking a process, starting with the people, and then they'll figure out what process much better than you could. That's one thing, and I think when we applied that in our business, we found it was very helpful and very lucrative. The second thing is we're in the talent development business. We take students where they are, and we take them where they are. And we try to get them to where they want to be or where they have the capacity to be. And sometimes it's where they need to be first and then where they want to be later. But we start there. And I think that's a lesson that business and industry learn of learners to be in the talent development business, not the human resource processing business where you put people in a box and their job is to fulfill the duties in the box. That's not our way we do things. And I think one of the reasons for example, I've got to drive back tonight. I teach an entrepreneurial boot camp that's done with our city and our county. The first time we did it, we had 19 people and 13 companies. I have 42 people and 34 companies now. And I teach an 8-week boot camp. What I'm seeing in there is our early stage companies, startup companies, the new companies out there that are doing very well. They're not trying to hire people and put them in a box. They're hiring talent, and they're letting the talent figure out what they can do in their companies. We're the best in the world at that. We know more than they will ever know about that. And when we help translate that for them, then we're going to create companies that are much more sustainable and are much less vulnerable to a global marketplace, because that talent can keep growing, whereas that product and that process has a shelf date from the day it has the first customer. So we're the best in the world at this, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity we have.
Thank you. Dr. Rainone, any quick comments on this?
My only thing is that, and my frustration about working with business and industry is that they're very fickle. They will say, I need to hire thousands of people, and when you actually get it down to, they need one. And I'm not exaggerating. But, you know, and do you have this program? Do you have that program?
They want you to prepare 1,000 so they can just pick one.
That's right. That's right. And you know, and we get all these people together, and they all have the same skill, needs and so forth. And they really, and frankly, being in workforce in the past and everything, the frustrating part is that we twist ourselves into a pretzel to serve their needs. And a lot of times, sometimes, not a lot of times, sometimes the results are not there on their end. And that's the frustrating part. So we will modify programs, we will create short-term training programs, we will do these types of things, and we produce the trained workforce to their specifications, and then they will hire one, or they will hire two. So, you know, that relationship, and I think that has taught me to be a little bit more cautious. And I mean, we're still going to serve their needs and with our talent, but you know, to really maybe be much more of a consultant, to really dig into specifically what they really need. I'm not sure they know what they need at times, and I think it's our job to really help them do in that. There's a book a number of years ago called Performance Consulting that I used in workforce. It was a husband and wife team. I can't remember the last name, but that's what they talked about, is that when you think you're done, ask more questions and be able to continuously dig and dig and dig.
I'm dying to ask more questions.
Okay.
But we've got 6.5 minutes remaining, so let's make sure that there's time for folks in the audience to ask at least one or two. So we have microphones available. Any questions from the audience? If not, I've got more lined up. Dr. Morrissey, right here in the second row in blue.
Thank you. Dr. Dever, I'm following up on the conversation you just had about what business and industry can learn from higher ed. I think it was, we had an ASAC COD meeting, I think, in your neck of the woods, and we had a little panel discussion, and you talked about developing that strong relationship between the academic world and the business and industry world. And I thought that some of your comments that you made in that conversation were quite striking and profound, and I wondered if you might say a little more about that. The importance of listening was one of the comments that you made. So if you might mention some of those ideas.
Well, it was very close to what Dr. Rainone was just saying. I remember that presentation starting off with, you all have probably had that experience. You've gone out there and they've told you they need this and this and this, and you've worked hard, and you go back 6 months later and here it is, and they've moved on someplace else, or it turned out they only needed 2 or 3, et cetera. And unless that dialogue is actually continuous between you, and unless they have a stake in the game, as well as us having a stake in the game, I think we often end up very frustrated with each other because of that. So two things. One, you can't just say, oh, I heard you, and then come back 6 months later with this program without having a lot of intervening conversations that clarified the consultation, the consulting that you're talking about so important. But two, don't just be the only one that's putting something into it. Ask them to contribute.
Good point.
It might be funding. It might be towards a position. It might be subject matter expertise. It might be equipment. It might be space. But they have to put something on the table as well and not expect just for us to produce. I do that not for reasons of you got to do your part. No, you need to do your part because when we do that, we're actually together in that way. And so that was a major message. And my feeling is that those projects that I've been involved with business and industry where they did put something in, those were the successful ones.
We have another question on this side of the room.
Good morning. Dr. Godwin, can you please expound on the stretch goals just a little bit?
Sure. Well, one of the things that in Smarter, Faster, Better in terms of stretch goals was those goals that really are beyond maybe immediate attainment. But if you were to create the final snapshot of what you would want it to look like, where you would see yourself, a 5-year or 10-year, what you envision for your organization. I'll give you, for Patrick Henry Community College, I want when anybody in Martinsville, Henry, and Patrick County, when you wake up in the morning and you've got to make any decision about your day, I want Patrick Henry Community College to be top of mind. It's where I'm going to go think about first to make my life better, what I'm going to do for the weekend. I want it to be top of mind. It's just a top of mind regardless. That's my vision. That's a stretch goal out there. But we have to do things every day that are SMART goals to attain that. And so I think for our students, that stretch goal is I have students say, I'd like to own my own business one day. But there's some very specific things, SMART goals they have to do today, but they can take that mental snapshot of cutting the ribbon in front of their new business or whatever. So the stretch it's just that next level where you've got to look beyond. You've got to take a snapshot in the future. And of course, when you hit that stretch goal, the idea is to do what? Create another one for there. And that's kind of how he frames that.
We've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to take the prerogative to ask one last question to this panel, but it's going to be a lightning round. So I'm going to ask you to spend about 30 seconds each on this tough question. So right now, I would say it's not an easy time to be a community college president. There's a lot of change going on right now in Virginia. Enrollments are hard to come by, and there's important work taking place in student success, in our shared services and business operations, and in workforce development. Those changes, big picture, it's not easy for anyone in this room right now, and you're leading organizations that do this. What did you read in the materials you have here? What's a lesson that was really contemporary or really topical or at the moment pertinent to you that you extended to the work you're undertaking right now as the challenges you face as a community college president? Tough one. 30 seconds. Anybody want to jump in on this? That you said this matters right now because. And we'll start with
Principle number 8 is absorbing data. I think that when we're dealing with the issues that we have before us nationally as well as in Virginia, that I think data can energize us. I think it can point us in the right direction. I think it also can redirect us, and it also gives us permission to stop. Just stop doing some stuff. If the data does not show it brings real value to our students and our communities, and that really jumped out at me. I needed to be reminded that it's okay to just stop if the data says it's not productive for our students and our communities.
Dr. Rainone, last word.
I go back to something I already said. At this point, you need to have courage, solid thinking, creativity. You need to really be able to think out of the box. And you got to have that hope and persistence. It's not gloom and doom. It is just a bump in the road.
Friends, we are just now out of time. If you want to hear Dr. Devers answer, you'll have to ask him personally. Please join me in thanking this panel.